Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number, I don't even know since we've been recording a bunch of these things. And tonight I have a special guest, and you have seen her from episode one, and that is my partner, Nikki.
Hello.
And usually I like to introduce who my guests are, but because she's Nikki, I'm gonna let her do that herself because this is her HER, capital ER.
What a dramatic introduction.
Very, very dramatic. So who are we with tonight? Who is this?
Well, my name is Nicole and I. I am a third-year medical student at UCSF. I am multiracial, Native Hawaiian on my dad's side, Italian white on my mom's side. And I grew up in California, was born and raised there, went to college there. And after college, I moved to Philly for 2 years, which is where I met Dio.
Yes, this was, what year was this? 2022?
Mhm.
And can I just say, I just want to say that year, okay, I was with my friends having a great time. And, this gorgeous girl came up to me, started speaking to me in Spanish because I was singing a Bad Bunny song that I knew word for word. And what did you say in Spanish?
¿De dónde eres?
¿De dónde eres? I knew what that meant. But I'm like, whoa. If I say where I'm from in Spanish, I'm not going to carry this whole conversation in Spanish. But anyway, as I digress.
Well, let's just say there's two stories. There's two sides of the story. There's two sides of the story. I did, in fact, go up to him. We were at a Latin club, let's be clear.
Yes.
So let's think it's very fair to think that maybe you speak Spanish. And I said, ¿De dónde eres? And you said, oh, I don't speak Spanish.
Don't. I really don't. I'm just a big fan of Benito. Like, he just has some bop hits that summer. Anyway, so tonight is, I think it's going to be quite the episode because I know that a lot of the topics we're going to touch on is going to hit a little bit of a home. But before we even get there, tell me about your upbringing. What made you who you are? What you didn't like? What you liked? Tell me about the whole shenanigan.
I think I touched on it a little bit. Growing up in a multiracial household had a really big influence on me. Being Native Hawaiian on my dad's side, I wanted to feel connected to the culture, but I didn't grow up on the islands. My grandpa, my dad's dad, came to San Francisco during World War II. He lied about his age to get a job, and he worked in the shipyards. And he was the oldest of 11 siblings. And he ended up staying in San Francisco, having 3 kids, and then he passed really suddenly when my dad was only 9. So my dad also grew up away from the islands, very disconnected from the culture. And Indigenous people, Native Hawaiians, we already have so much historical loss with colonization, loss of land, loss of culture, loss of traditions. So I'm already dealing with this loss and also being away from my island, from my culture, from the people who could teach me some of those things. So I struggled, I think, growing up, feeling like Hawaiian enough or Native enough, and also feeling very blessed to grow up in California, which is very diverse. Growing up in a very diverse household and family where we have quite a mixture of races, cultures, ethnicities all together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my racial identity has been really important to me.
Mm. So what kinds of activities or hobbies do you partake in today that makes you feel still connected to the Hawaiian side of your family?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I watched my auntie dance hula,
Mm.
and it was really special. It's just so grounding, the way that she could move so gracefully and the way that she told a story with just movement and just her hands. And I was like, that's my culture, and I want to be able to do that. So I started late, but I joined a local halau, and I've been dancing ever since. Me and my auntie, it's something that we really share and bond over, and it's something that's kept me connected to my culture.
Okay. And what about your Italian side of the family? How do you still kind of keep in touch with, you said, the Italian side of the family?
Absolutely. I think on my mom's side, it's a little different because we are Sicilian, but we're like fourth, fifth generation.
Mm.
So when they came over, I think my mom's mom was still more connected to Italian culture, but it's kind of dissipated over time. That being said, one of my favorite pastimes with my mom's side of the family is eating Italian food.
Mm.
Every holiday, every Christmas, every Easter,
Mm.
it's Italian food.
I'm jealous. I love Italian food, and the fact that you get to enjoy it 4, 6 times a year over Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Oh, that is so great. That is really, really great. Now, who makes the best Italian food in the family? I gotta know.
In the family?
In the family.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't really think many of us make Italian food.
Uh-oh.
I think we more eat out at Italian restaurants.
Oh, man. We gotta change that.
I know.
Because
I'll bring it back.
Italian food. What's your favorite Italian dish?
My favorite Italian dish? Probably lasagna or rigatoni. It's super basic.
What about your favorite Hawaiian dish?
My favorite one? Ooh. Well, for snackies, you can't go wrong with spam musubi or poke.
Mm.
For like dishes, that's a tough one. Maybe like chicken long rice or lau lau.
Never had those. I do want some. I do want to try some later this summer. So, Nikki, the reason why I am very, very interested in bringing you on tonight is because, as an only son and as a grandson, and of course as a child who was a former DACA recipient. And for those of us who don't know what DACA recipient is, it's pretty much an immigration status that President Barack Obama had established in the year 2012 that lets, I believe, children under the age of 16 at the time to receive not only Social Security, but the ability to drive, a driver's license, a work permit, and etc. So as a student and as a former child who identified as a DACA recipient, I didn't really have the privilege of going home when I wanted to, right? Which also means the ugly side of that is I don't get to witness a burial should there be a family member that had passed in my family, or any type of special events, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a birth of somebody, none of that. And I'm curious because I have been I guess you could say, in a very blessed and cursed position where I haven't technically lost a family member that I'm close to, because, for all the passings that I've had in my life, I've always had to witness it online, which hits a little different, and it's off because it's like, well, I can't really feel some type of way, but, I guess I'll feel bad when I'll feel bad. And I think those feelings tend to get a lot worse in a sense that it's suppressed, because the more bad news I hear within my family, whether it's from my dad's side or my mom's side, I don't ever think about it. I don't necessarily absorb the full emotional aspect of how it should be. But when I do see how my dad and my mom react, that's when it kind of hits a little bit more home, because I know that they're a lot closer to their family than I'm closer with them, if that makes sense. And that's okay for those of us who don't necessarily understand. But how does it feel, losing a family member that you are close to? And what were some of the feelings that you had felt during this time of grief?
Yeah, I think there comes a time for everyone when they experience grief and loss, and it doesn't always have to be in the form of like losing a loved one. I think grief manifests in many different ways. But on this topic of loss of a loved one, I think it's really hard to describe because it's so unique to you and the relationship you had with that person. I'm going to speak for myself and also recognize that other people's experiences with grief is very different. For me, the first time that I lost someone very close to me, it was my grandma. It was my dad's mom. We shared the same birthday. People say I'm just as stubborn as she is. She just had this youthful spirit, and she was this advocate, this social justice warrior who always looked out for everyone around her. And me and her had a really close bond. So when I lost her in high school, it hit me really hard. I think what hit me even harder too was the fact that I couldn't be there for her when she died. It's something that I think I will live with and regret for the rest of my life. But I also recognize that not everyone has the privilege of being with that person when they pass. And we just have to recognize that life goes on, and we have to find ways to cope with that and hope that they are proud of us and looking at us.
What were some of the most difficult aspects after the passing of your grandma? And when I say aspect, let me clarify. Aspect as in, some of the coping mechanisms that you had used to, just deal with the situation, because like you said, you weren't there when it happened. And you said too, you will, this is going to be something that you will regret for the rest of your life. So again, right, in some ways that speaks to me in a lot of volume, right? In a sense of, I wasn't there when my grandpa from my mom's side passed, and I wasn't there when my cousin died suddenly and leaving a 1-year-old, and I wasn't there when, my dad's brother died, my uncle died. It kind of, it changes your perspective on some of the moments that I could have embraced, when I was younger, when I was still back home, right? So I guess for you, what did that look like, and what were some of the most difficult things that you had to overcome?
I think when you ask what coping skills I used, I would say none. When it happened, I didn't have the coping skills. I was in denial. And it took me a really long time to face the fact that, I will never have another conversation with her. I will never celebrate our birthdays together again, When I say it's something that I regret, I think it was a period in my life. I was in high school. I didn't understand death and dying. And I think it was really a difficult conversation for my parents to have with me because of experiences in their life with death. So when it actually happened, it didn't feel real to me. And that's why I think it took so much longer. So thinking back on that moment, for me, even though I was in high school, I think I really needed to be told directly, like, she's dying. And you need to make the most of the time you have left with her. It's a really difficult conversation to have with someone that their loved one is dying. And I know my parents were trying to protect me, but now looking back on it, I think I would have been able to prepare myself and cope a little better if I had known ahead of time. And now being an aspiring physician, I think that's coming into play as well, with learning how to have end-of-life discussions with families and with loved ones.
Mm-hmm. What were some things you wished that could have happened in how that whole situation played out with you and your grandma? Because this is, again, selfishly speaking, this is something I think about all the time, right? I think about, man, if my parents didn't take us to this country, we would have been there for all of the important stuff that happened in our family. But now we're left with whatever that's on WhatsApp, whatever that we see on Facebook. And I wish all the time that I would trade my position in all of this to just be with my family, because, again, right, like, just as an immigrant, you really tend to lose a little bit of your identity, if not a lot of your identity, after not only losing family members, but just losing who you are because of it. So, again, to repeat, what are some things that you wish that you think could have or should have happened at the time of your grandma's passing?
Yeah, I think in my specific circumstance, again, it's so difficult to say for other people. Like, for instance, with you, like, you didn't have the privilege of being able to be there, like, in your country or go back. Like, I was in the same city as my grandma, and she was older, and she had a lot of health issues, and she was declining. And I knew that her health was declining, but I didn't comprehend what it was like for her to actually pass away and to not have that same relationship with her anymore. What I needed for my parents to do was to really sit me down and say, like, hey, really think about what it's going to be like when grandma's gone and cherish those moments you have now. And, life is super busy. We all have lots of commitments. I know at the time I was taking a bunch of AP classes. I was applying to college. I was working. And I remember it was a Thursday night. My mom said, we're going to go see grandma tomorrow. Do you want to come with us? And I said, well, tomorrow's Friday. I'm working. Can I come Saturday? And my parents said, okay, even though I think they knew something I didn't. And when I came home from work Friday, I had found out she passed. And my dad got to be there with her, and I didn't. And again, it's something that I really struggle with because I didn't see that I was putting other things ahead of her, prioritizing other things in my life. Because for me, family is number one. But sometimes we make mistakes. And sometimes we don't want to face the truth that someone is dying in front of us. And if we want to deal with that, we have to be there for it.
And that leads me to my next question. As an aspiring physician, with the probability of having, a busy schedule depending on what focus you want to do, how does that kind of impact, the direction or trajectory that you're going to be, in the next 3 to 4 years or so, just from what you've learned from that?
Yeah, I think no matter like what field I go into or what direction I go, being able to talk to someone about their treatment goals, their what they value in their life and where they hope to get to, and in some circumstances their end of life care and end of life goals. I think that those are skills that I will carry with me into wherever I go. It's patient-centered care to be able to ask someone like, hey, what do you want from this? Like have them actively participate in care instead of the typical westernized paternalism of I'm the doctor, I'm going to tell you what to do. I just did like a surgery rotation, right? So we had a case where this was a man in his 30s with cancer who was probably going to die. And the surgeons were debating whether the surgery for palliation was even worth it because it wasn't curative. And I remember going to talk to this patient and he said, no one's telling me what the plan is. And I think I'm going to die this year, but no one's telling me. And it's really hard because as a physician, you want to be a healer and you want to fix things. But sometimes you can't. And it's in those moments that you have to find other ways to heal. And finding someone's priorities in life and what they value and how they want to spend the rest of their days is healing.
And okay, so now that you are on that path to becoming a physician, you're obviously going to find yourself in that other side of, the medical care of where, let's say, your grandma was in the bed and you're going to be that doctor that's going to be, taking care of who the patient is. You're going to have to break some news to, parents or even siblings. The kind of communication style that I've learned from you with, some doctors are truly surprising, and sometimes how they interact with patients, right? But I guess how do you specifically, how do you plan on giving that communication with your patients, no matter how hard the news could be? Do you give them the full truth? Do you beat around the bush? Or do you kind of just pass it along to somebody else for them to break the news? Like, what is your plan for that?
I think it depends. And I know that's not the answer you want. But every person is different and how they're going to want to receive the news is different, right? When I think about delivering bad news, I think about asking for permission and setting expectations early, saying, what have you been told so far? What do you want me to tell you today? What do you want to know? Who do you want to be there when I tell you? Those are questions that I think are important, and we can't make the assumption that everyone wants the same thing. There's also cultural factors too.
That's right.
In terms of who's going to do it, I would absolutely do it. But I think that what's most important is whoever has the most rapport and the most trust with the patient. So if it's not me, then obviously someone else should do it. But that person should be someone the patient trusts. And so that you're able to not just deliver the news, but come up with a plan. This isn't like, we can't help you. This is what we know it's happening. So let's figure out a plan together, and I will be with you every step of the way.
I like that. You brought up a topic that I'm very passionate about, and that's just culture. When you say responding on, okay, let me say this again. So responding based on, what the cultural factors are with each patient, I think that's very important, right? And so it leads me to think about how, as an immigrant, it's, I had the privilege of understanding how the East communicates and how the West communicates, and that the East is very more so kind, very gentle with their words. They're not necessarily like in your face, whereas the West is like now, come on, let's do it now. Like they're right in your face. How do you think we could learn or benefit from just understanding, different perspectives from those cultural standards, not just as a physician too, but just as individuals, whether we're in tech like myself, whether we're in college, or whether we identify as a 50-year-old who may not understand or very close-minded, very parochial to that cultural factors.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, like by West and East, are we talking about like Western, Eastern culture or like West Coast, East Coast?
Oh, no, Western and Eastern culture.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Thank you for clarifying.
Well, I was like the West Coast is actually vice versa, but no, Western, Eastern culture, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a right or wrong way, right? I don't think that we can say like Western culture versus Eastern culture, like one way is doing it right or wrong. I think it helps to expand your mind when you recognize that everyone's coming from a different place. And so if you come from a Western culture and you're speaking to someone with an Eastern culture, but you're not adapting to the way that they communicate, your message is going in one ear out the other. It's about adapting and being flexible and being willing and open-minded to understand different communication styles, different backgrounds, different cultures. I think a lot about like my own identity, and something I really value as a multiracial person is this fluidity of identity and being able to kind of navigate different spaces. I once had someone tell me that being multiracial in Hawaiian culture, it's like being mulivai. Mulivai means it's like in English, it's brackish waters, which sounds so terrible. Mulivai is much prettier. But what brackish waters or mulivai is where the salt water and the fresh water meet. And so you're not entirely saltwater, you're not entirely freshwater, you're a little bit of both. And you can adapt to both of those cultures, both of those environments. And I relate to that as a multiracial person, but I think that you don't have to be multiracial to be able to adapt and be fluid and navigate different spaces with people of different backgrounds.
I love that. Wow. A lot of wisdom tonight. Learning a lot more about you than I thought I would. See, this is why I had her on this podcast, even though you were super shy about it. So getting back into the familial, dialogue that we were talking about before, and I wanted to talk about your grandpa briefly. If that's okay with you. And I know that his passing was very recent, and it was a tough time for both of us, honestly. And I know how much you guys were really close to each other. But I think the relationship that you and your grandfather, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just from what I've seen, the relationship that you and your grandfather had were very tight knit, right? You were very close. You spent time with each other. But for those of us who tend to avoid spending time with our elderlies, like what are some things you would encourage us to do as an action step to sort of remind ourselves that, everyone's times are going to be temporary, no matter what. So what is it that we can do to be a better grandson or a better granddaughter or even a better son or daughter in general for those that are, are of age, soon to be?
I think that there's two ways or two things that I'm thinking about when you bring up my grandfather, which is one, when he was alive, the lessons that he taught me were invaluable. And the time that we spent together, we spent beautiful time together, but I wish we had more time. We always wish we had more time. And I wish I'd asked more questions. Like, what is some of the wisdom that he had from his life that I can carry on with me? Kind of what we talked about, storytelling, like storytelling with the grandparents in your life. Like, they have the most incredible stories and life lessons and things to bestow upon you, but you have to be a willing listener. And sometimes they might not be as open to sharing it, but if you ask the right questions, you'll get it out of them. And I think the other thing I think about is valuing what they want at the end of their life and asking them those questions as well. Like, for my grandpa, he didn't want to spend the rest of his life bedridden. And we wanted him to be with us for as long as possible. But that was a bit selfish of us when what he wanted was to just let go. I think that I need to be a little more specific because that's kind of vague. My grandpa did end up choosing Aiden dying as an option. And I think that was really difficult for my mom and for all of us. But I think that it was what he wanted, and dying with dignity is so important to have that option and choice for people.
If there was one thing you could say to both your grandma and your grandpa before they had passed, what would it be?
I hope I can make you proud. I think that there's so many things. Honestly, I think I'd want to ask them more questions than tell them things. Like, I just want to learn more about their life. But most importantly, I want to carry on their legacy. So I hope that in everything that I do, I carry aspects of them, their values, their characteristics, and I put it into my work. And I say that at my core, like, they made me who I am.
And how have your parents sort of, teach you how to cope with the whole emotional feelings of things like this, right? I mean, I know that, like, you being the youngest of three, like, you were obviously exposed to not only your parents but your siblings' coping mechanisms as well. But what were some things that you picked up from them and from your siblings on how to cope the right way? Because and I know this is a little bit repetitive from before, because you did say that you didn't really know how to cope when you lost your grandma, right? But even, let's say, after that and up until now, especially very recently when you lost your grandpa, like, what were some coping mechanisms that you took that you considered were healthy?
I think that while I didn't know how to cope in high school, I think I coped a little better with my grandpa's passing most recently. I think I'll talk about the influence my parents had on me, and I also want to talk about one of my best friends. So my parents are kind of two extremes. My dad is kind of a class clown, and he makes light of everything. Like, humor is his coping mechanism. I can't help but think some of that humor, that dark humor, kind of if you trace it back when his dad died when he was only 9, he wasn't even allowed to go to the funeral because my grandma was trying to protect him and didn't want to expose him to death. But by not exposing him to death, I think he's had a hard time facing death and dealing with it. And then you have my mom, who is very much a verbal processor, who feels all of the emotions and expresses all of the emotions, almost to like a level where sometimes she buries herself in her emotions and it's hard to find a way out, right? So there's kind of like those extremes. And I think that I try to take a little bit of both. I think that humor is a way of coping. I think that it's really important to have those really strong emotions and feelings and to get vulnerable. And I think my best example for like coping with grief as my best friend Sophia. She's like the light of my life, and her Nana passed last year, before my grandpa passed, and it was really hard on her. It's still hard on her. Grief comes in waves. But being able to talk about it with someone has been what's helped me the most. It's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Some people isolate, some people journal, reflect, make podcasts. I think for me, it was talking with a really good friend who went through something similar and just kind of feeling those feelings together.
Mm-hmm. What about for those of us who have difficulty in both expressing how we feel through words and having difficulty in just being vulnerable in general? What are some action steps that we could take first for us to get better in that? Because like you said, right, like I think, being emotionally vulnerable is important for yourself, most importantly, but it's going to be important in any partnerships that we're going to be a part of. So again, what are some first critical steps that we can take to be a better communicator and to be more expressive?
I think those are good questions. I want to recognize that being vulnerable takes time and maybe isn't everyone's coping method. I think if we're framing it in the light of how to become more in tune with your emotions, some actionable steps you can take, absolutely journaling and reflecting and really trying to understand why you feel the way you do. I did a lot of therapy in the past, and in like cognitive behavioral therapy, you think of like thoughts, feelings, actions, how they're all interconnected. So if we start with feelings, if you're not addressing the fact that you're sad, right, and you're dealing with grief, you might not realize that these thoughts you're having of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, or I can't make it through the day, or everything's terrible, might be stemming from the fact that you have these unmet, untouched emotions that you haven't dealt with. And then that could lead to then behaviors or actions of isolation or bad coping skills, or kind of withholding information. So I think if we think about the feelings, thoughts, actions pattern, we come back to the feelings first and foremost. Like, why am I feeling this way? What is it about grief and losing this specific person is making me feel and do and think these terrible things? And how can I open up to someone or journal or reflect or go to therapy? Like, what are some avenues that I am willing to take right now to kind of deal with those feelings?
Those are good. What about therapy? I know I give you a lot of bad times. Not a lot of bad times, but I give her hard times about this because, this isn't because I'm closed about therapy at all, but I think the stigma around, seeking a shrink in Southeast Asian culture is very frowned upon. Because like my dad always say, just come to us for help. Talk to us. We're your parents. We're always going to be here. And we're free 99. So I always spend money on therapy. And And I think obviously a lot of that has changed, especially in this country. I think, seeking counseling or just help in general is a lot more normalized now than I feel like it is in I'm not going to say Asia, but in Indonesia. What is it about therapy that you think could benefit us, from healing?
I think that I'm biased because I'm interested in mental health and psychiatry. But I think what draws me to it is that there is a lot of mental health need in the community, that even though we're told go to your parents or go to your family, not everyone can, not everyone has that privilege. And sometimes having a third person, an outsider perspective, to kind of help you navigate those difficult emotions or feelings, you need that objectivity. Because when you're dealing with these kinds of feelings with someone very close to you, like your parents, obviously they're going to have their own feelings involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when you have a therapist and you have like this third perspective, they don't have those feelings. They can kind of look at it a little more objectively and help you navigate all of the different factors and influences that you might have when you're dealing with these things. Like maybe you don't even realize it, but your parents are part of like the pressure that you have, and like maybe some of the reasons you're feeling a certain way, right? So why it would be really difficult to go to your parents when they could be contributing to what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I want to recognize that therapy is very westernized and it is not always culturally tailored or culturally relevant. And that is changing. I think that there's more BIPOC therapists. I think that we're finding there's like ways to base therapy or therapeutic skills in culture and in community, so that it's not just the classic like shrink on and then person laying on a couch, right? It's more like understanding of someone's cultural background, and maybe the ways that they communicate is different than the typical westernized approach.
I love that. That gives me some sort of closure, I guess, because I know therapy is definitely a westernized thing. But, being a son and being an immigrant who did grow up in this country and he's still growing up in this country, I do want to partake in that eventually. And I think it's a matter of really like it's not because I can't afford it either, but not a flex, by the way, but it's really like, I think just the feeling of both awkwardness and fear that you're literally just trauma dumping to somebody you don't know, right? Like that's weird to me. You know what I'm saying? And I know I'm like speaking in front of cameras of all this too, but I think this is a lot more tolerable than, actually facing a professional who, arguably knows everything in and out of like mental health. Like that's the scary part about like seeking a shrink. But I've acknowledged and I recognize that that's something I need to work on too. And I feel like a lot of us do. But maybe it is a deterrent on self-growth and, emotional development as well. But, hopefully one day we get there.
I think that we can eventually unwrap some of your hesitancies,
Mm-hmm.
maybe lie deeper to people-pleasing tendencies or fear of what they might tell you about yourself.
Mm.
It takes a lot of courage to go to therapy. And if you're not ready for it, if it's not for you, no one should force you into it. I think I'm having a really positive experience with it. Want other people to experience that too. And I also recognize that it's just not for everyone. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm with you. Nikki, what makes you feel the most alive?
It's funny because you say like storytelling is what makes you feel alive, and I feel like it's what makes me feel alive too. But ironically, I don't like to be the one talking. I like to be the one listening. And it really gives me a lot of joy to learn about other people. I think that's what draws me to medicine, is like the beautiful relationships you can build in such short periods of time with people, learn about their backgrounds, and then help each other heal in the process. There's a lot of reciprocity and service. And it's what I want to do. I think it brings me a lot of joy.
I'm excited for you. Gonna be a damn good doctor, and I can retire, yo. It's the best part. I can do this full time. I'm just kidding. And last question before we leave on the camera. Who are you?
That's it. Just who am I?
Who are you? And I'm not talking about the same introduction that you gave us. Not the Nikki aspiring physician, the third-year medical student. No. Who are you?
I'm just a girl in this world who's trying to find her purpose and her way in life.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. As always, I really enjoy our episodes. I feel like the more we do this together, the more I learn from you, which is so dope. And I can't wait for all the next episodes we get to share. And hoping by then you'll learn more about the in and outs of medicine. And hoping you pick in your practice by then too. So thank you everyone for tuning in and watching. I'll see y'all in the next episode. Peace out.